Okay, let's get this party started. Here we are, March the 23rd, 2023, the third anniversary of that very first COVID lockdown. And how brilliant it is to see a room full of people, not socially distanced, just like a number 10 party. Great to see familiar faces, not so familiar faces. Great to see people from so many different organisations all come together. We're here to make up for lost time. We've had 3 lost years. Let's crack on. We're here to talk about rewilding, about the future. And in this magnificent mining institute, the engine room of the Great North Coalfield in its Victorian heyday, tastefully refurbished with financial assistance from the Rees Foundation, who we're here to celebrate today as well. So, there is a particular resonance and relevance to hosting the event at this venue, of course. Coal was the black gold which gave us, this region, its wealth, its prestige, its sense of pride, amazing buildings like this, the fabulous Grey Street, the wealth that flowed through this region. But of course, coal mining, deep mining and open cast also left a legacy of pollution and damaged landscapes that took decades to repair, but which the Northumberland Wildlife Trust has done so much to mitigate in recent decades. It was 50 years ago, in 1973, that a far-sighted Wildlife Trust member, Ian Kerr, some of you may know him, suggested a Northumbrian Minsmere at Druridge Bay once open-cast coal extraction ended. Now, for the non-birders in the room, Minsmere is the RSPB's flagship wetland reserve in Suffolk that was the last bastion of the marsh harrier. It was down to just 1 pair in the UK in 1971. Well, extensive planting of reed beds in subsequent decades across the country has enabled the harrier's subsequent expansion up to and including our very own East Chevington Reserve. But I'm getting ahead of myself. So coincidentally, in 1971, as the marsh harrier stared oblivion in the face, the National Coal Board Open Cast Executive had started discussions with Northumberland County Council and the Wildlife Trust about what to do with the giant holes they'd dug out behind the dunes along the Coalfield coast. 10 years on, from Ian Kerr's suggestion of wetland creation in those moonscapes left behind by the open casters, in 1983, the Trust did indeed purchase the worked-out Radcliffe open cast site south of Amble and created the lagoon at its new Hawksley Reserve. Tony Tynan, the inspirational founder of the Northumberland Wildlife Trust, invited Bert Axel from Minsmere to advise on the Hawksley Scrape, although a worked-out coalfield was obviously rather different to the flooded fields at Minsmere. Hawksley was the first jewel in that necklace of wetlands that now arcs around Druridge Bay, through the country park to the Trust reserves of East Chevington, Druridge Pools and Cresswell Pond at the southern end of the bay. The Open Cast Executive and its successors in the privatised coal mining world, notably R.J. Budge, gradually relinquished control of worked-out open cast sites through the 1980s and 1990s and indeed contributed to their landscaping. The open-sided bus shelter Budge Hyde at Druridge Pools is a reminder of that partnership and is, for the record, the coldest place on the northeast coast to watch birds. It's possibly the coldest place on earth to watch birds. The acquisition of the extensive East Chevington site came in 2003. You see the relevance, all these threes. In 2003 was the final piece of the jigsaw, and 20 years later, the establishment of substantial reed beds at both the North and South Lakes has now finally created that Minsmere of the North that Ian Kerr had envisaged way back in 1973. Just like Minsmere, we now have marsh harriers, we have otters, we have visiting bitterns and bearded tits that must inevitably, surely, become established breeding species at the site. Over the past 20 years, the development of the Druridge reserves has continued with new initiatives and greater wildlife diversity. The most recent success story at East Chevington was the culmination of that 3-year Catch My Drift project, funded by the Heritage Lottery Fund. Alongside habitat restoration, 300 harvest mice were released in the summer of 2021. In 2022, 36 nests were found at East Chevington by Trust survey workers, with evidence that some of these intrepid mice, which is Europe's smallest rodent, had actually travelled 2 miles south to Druridge Pools. But the rewilding of the coalfield coast has not been without its challenges, most notably when old King Coal attempted to reclaim his throne. Banks Mining applied in October 2015 to reintroduce open-cast coal mining at Druridge inland from the Cresswell Pond and Druridge Pools reserves, with plans to extract 3 million tonnes of coal from a 250-hectare site. Now, this could have been a serious setback to the vision of a joined-up series of wildlife reserves and green corridors around Druridge Bay. But a spirited opposition campaign forced the government to call in the planning application, and in 2020, the Secretary of State ruled against the last open-cast coal mine in Northumberland. Historically, open casting also took place well inland of Druridge Bay. The landscape was peppered with extensive open-cast coal mines, Butterwell, Stobswood, Maiden's Hall, you can remember the names, which have now been restored to low-grade farmland of little wildlife value. But that's about to change. Thanks to a £2 million donation from the Rees Foundation, the Wildlife Trust has now skipped across the Druridge Bay Coast Road and headed west to develop the potential of the Druridge hinterland. 327 hectares, or more than 800 acres in old money, of post-opencast land was purchased last year for the exciting Wilding West Chevington project, and we'll be hearing much more about this very shortly. Wilding, or rewilding, are now familiar words in our vocabulary, and not just in the conservation community. They're words recognised by the wider public too, although for many, rewilding probably conjures up images of wolves and bears roaming outside their front doors. Everyone here probably has their very own definition of what wilding or rewilding actually means, which is why today's event is such a great opportunity to find a common language and common themes as we discuss landscape-scale regeneration of our wild spaces. The standard bearer for rewilding in England has, of course, been the Knepp estate in Sussex, where the transition from intensive farming to wild land started more than 20 years ago. At Knepp, Isabella Tree and Charlie Burrell also grappled with wilding or rewilding to define what they were embarking upon, particularly when they had to articulate this novel concept to Natural England in seeking grant aid for that extensive fencing that they needed around the blocks of land upon which their herds of cattle, pigs, deer and ponies would re-engineer former farmland to the site that they now have. And the inspiration for Knepp, of course, was the Oostvaardersplassen, hope I pronounced that correctly, in the Netherlands. 50 square kilometres of polders reclaimed from the sea. The rewilding experiment there started when conic ponies were first released in 1983. That's the same year that the Trust took possession of the Hawksley site in Druridge Bay. So, 40 years on from the establishment of Hawksley, the Trust is about to embark on its own ambitious rewilding project in the wider Druridge landscape. It could be argued that the south set the pace at Knepp and at Wild Ken Hill in Norfolk, where BBC Springwatch has been based in recent years, but the north is rising now. There's been great work by the RSPB at Haweswater in the Lake District, described in Lee Schofield's book Wild Fell, and by fellow wildlife trusts in the region. Wilding West Chevington is the next chapter in that story, and I invite Mike Pratt, Chief Executive of the Northumberland Wildlife Trust, to start today's conference by telling us more. And before I do, I should point out the fire escapes. Don't all head for the exits. Mike's about to stand up. Go through the archway. There is no fire practice plan. Go through the archway, turn left. We muster across the road. And you'll have found the toilets on the ground floor where you signed in as well. I think that's all I need to say. Mike Pratt.
Use this one? Yeah. Okay. It's just fantastic to see everybody here, to be honest, in this amazing place, isn't it? I think we should coin the term bringing green gold to Newcastle, because we're doing that collectively today, aren't we? It's all on us to really mark out and create that future that Adrian has just touched on there. And there's a lot of fantastic work going on already. That's why we're all here to share all of that. Now, unusual for me, I'm actually written down what I'm going to say, so I don't ad-lib for 40 minutes, which I would love to do, but you now know where the exits are, so I won't do that. I just want to reflect on a few things as well as say some welcomes and some thank yous, which are very much earned. It's an absolute privilege and pleasure to welcome everybody here. I think this is the first Wilding, Rewilding Nature Recovery Conference for what I'd call the proper north of England, i.e. Durham, South and North Tyneside, Newcastle, Gateshead and Northumberland, including, I think, as well, a keynote from Scotland we'll hear this afternoon, which we will surely draw great inspiration from and make many connections with. I see this as the start of a real joined-up northern-wide bigger picture for nature recovery. I know it started already, but we need to scale it up. This is the next big step, and we're trying to take it today and maybe over the next 2 days. I'm also pleased to say that my colleagues from Durham and Cumbria Wildlife Trust, Jim Corkill and Steve Trotter, are here today. So they're representing their areas and the extensions and works going on there. We also have Rob Stoneman, who's the Wildlife Trust National Director for Nature Recovery. Happy birthday, Rob. Thanks for coming on this fine day to celebrate with us. All of them are here to share in this view across the piece of this part of the north. And I hope everyone will take the opportunity, which I'm hoping I certainly am trying to do, to work and think beyond our boundaries, to sort of get out of our collective silos and our organisational mindsets a bit as well. Because I think that is where the big changes and the big opportunities will be realised. We need to work really well in our own areas, but we really need to put it together better, is what I would suggest. So, but before I go into saying a few words about that, I just want to say some thank yous. Specifically, I need and especially want to give a welcome and thank you to our sponsors and partners in Wilding, the Rees Foundation, without whom we would not, as a Northumberland Wildlife Trust, have realised the dream, and it is a dream, come true, of West Chebington acquisition for rewilding and more besides. And of course they did sponsor this event and our free lunch today. So, special thanks are particularly due, I don't want to embarrass you, Anne, to Anne Rees, who is a fantastic rewilding advocate in her own right and has a great vision for changes that we share. I'm describing you here as a mighty one-woman catalyst for positive action. And you probably sort of wear that on a T-shirt at some point, we'll provide. I could sort of stand here and say how the West Chebington thing actually came about, but actually it'd be pretty boring because it was a couple of phone calls when the land came up for sale. Anne thought was already prospecting to try out proper rewilding in the region, and basically we just put it together. She said, yes, let's do it. And it went from there. Of course, all the legal stuff you never want to hear about because it's really dreadful. But we got there in the end. Duncan and I nearly had a nervous breakdown, but apart from that, we're all right. I'd also like to say thanks for all the other funders and everyone actually here and beyond this room who's helped get the Wilding show on the road. And not just this event, all the action that's taking place, from Reedsdale to Druridge to the city as well. And that's very much part of our vision, to rewild people's lives and within the city of Newcastle and hopefully Gateshead. So all of you are committed to a wilder future for nature, wildlife and landscape in the northern places we love. Many, we will see, are already doing this great work, and even bigger intentions, I think, are in some of our minds. Together today, maybe we can push all of these efforts to a higher level and see what is possible to get more and greater impact. Impact is a key word. That's what I hope we'll get out of today and maybe tomorrow. There's a lot to be done still to make a lasting difference to bring nature back. Even in Northumberland, where we expect to experience the wildest county in England, it is wild in parts and to degrees, but has enormous potential still. And even here, much has been lost. Its natural biodiversity and abundance reduced, really tragically. We are starting with more than most places towards the acclaimed 30% by 2030 for area managed specifically for nature. but it is a very low baseline still to climb up from. The wildness we pursue, a restored natural environment, will be important for economy, climate, well-being and communities, and not just for nature's sake alone. It will provide a better future for us all. This is increasingly realised and expressed, pleasingly, for example, in the new Rural Investment Plan for Northumberland, where nature is central to sustainable growth. And through the lens of our work at Druridge and elsewhere in partnership, by hearing from many local initiatives today, we will reflect on what can be done more, bigger, better, more joined up to bring about more wild. Not just here, but across the north we can influence together. Here in this north, with what we all are starting to do at scale, if we get it right and are innovative in sharing especially experience and data, it could become, I think, a zone of rewilding enlightenment. That's not too strong a word. For wilding and nature recovery more widely, the range of opportunities here is so unique and vast, as a whole potentially on a par with Scotland and parts of Europe. This is the biggest chance we have in England to restore nature at scale. I think we sort of know that, but it's really something to reflect on. I'm looking straight at Tom here, who manages Kielder Head. Well, it's not a bad start, is it? The scale of that place. Do you have anything going around through those forests? We do have to be systematic, though, and scientific to have better baselines and systems and be evidence-led. We're all doing that to an extent, but perhaps not in unison as much as we could be. So I also think we need to think about designing and setting up a Northern Wilding Intelligence Hub so we can share information and experience much more effectively. We also need vision, imagination and bravery to act. To see what is possible, we need to dare to dream. We had no idea we would ever get West Chevington or even be able to buy a wilding site of that scale. And actually, that's still not enough in my dream. Mine's like 3-4 times as big as that, so that we can really restore natural processes. But if you don't have the intention, nothing really happens. We have to set it and go for it. And if Derek Gow was here, he'd be banging on here and saying, he's got his Darwinian beard as well, hasn't he? Everything. He'd really look the part. And he'd be saying, we need to find quicker ways. It would have a lot more expletives in it than that, but you get the gist. I agree with him. We can't wait decades to restore nature. We have to find ways of quickening the whole thing up. Otherwise, we'll run out of time. We already are. But we also need to let nature show us the way and let it lead its own restoration. This may not always be possible with prescriptive outcomes that some funders might require. I'm thinking of offsetting particularly. But whenever we can, we need to go with nature's flow. Now, it may have been Lao Tzu, the Chinese Taoist philosopher, who said, when people walk with wild nature, harmony is created and all good things flow. We are far from being in harmony with nature. I don't know if you've noticed. But perhaps we can progress towards it together. And I actually, looking at Charles Baker Cresswell and John up there, actually they may not agree with that because I've been on their farm and actually it does feel pretty much in harmony. Fantastic piece of organic farming in a great landscape where people are really caring for that landscape through farming. So it's not all bad, but so much more we need to do together. So we need to join efforts. The collective power and energy, resource and will in this room alone is phenomenal if we harness it effectively. And that's why we've got you all together and we're locking those exits really for most of the day to make sure that we really collaborate more than ever before and also into the evening and then at West Chevington tomorrow. This is it's like an intensive training course in collaboration and working together. We didn't tell you that, did we? But there you are. So finally from me, it's a lot about land, isn't it? But it's also really about people. And maybe we should have another conference on that theme alone. The integration of all aspects of what makes a healthy place with nature central, realising a joint vision through a joined approach to make north of Tyne, Cumbria, Durham and Scottish borders and beyond, as wild as we can, and working with people all the way. It's the only way we'll do it. And at the end of this day and our site visit tomorrow, I hope there'll be a feeling of epiphany, of strong realisation of what is truly possible, and of a higher ambition all round. Yes, locally and singly, we'll all do our own things, won't we? But especially in how we bond networks together for nature and people's sakes in our north, this north that we all know and work in. And we need to act together now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mike. That was very inspirational.
Morning, everybody. This is the word from your sponsor, or our sponsor. I did say to Mike, it's nothing like free lunch to get a room full, right? And it's worked, which is very, very pleasing, I have to say. When I look around and see the people that are here today, this is the people we wanted. And I completely concur with what Mike says. If you guys can get together, and if you can turn those words that you're going to talk about today into some form of action, we will achieve something in Northumberland. There's no question about it. Back to the script. I think I should just introduce why we at the Rees Foundation are sponsoring this event, and why we got involved with this, and why we're involved with nature in Northumberland as a whole. The Rees Foundation is a local charity set up by my father, and now a family charity, set up in 2007, utilising the wealth that he made from starting and running some engineering companies on Tyneside. So the money came from the workers of Tyneside, and basically his vision and the family vision is to put a fair chunk of that back into Tyneside and into the northeast. The aims of the foundation, which you can look up, are stated as being to increase the long-term and sustainable prosperity of the northeast. Then goes on to say primarily by the promotion of skills in engineering and technical science skills, because that's where the wealth that we generated came from. And that's what we saw as very important to the future of the northeast. But the trustees of the foundation are very, very well aware that the word prosperity doesn't just mean money, and it doesn't just mean jobs, though those things are extremely important in an area like this. Other things are also important if we're going to have prosperous, healthy, worthwhile lives. And in that sphere, we've always been interested in the protection of wilderness. We've worked in Scotland with the John Muir Trust, and in the promotion of good environment, nature education for people in the inner city particularly. And it was whilst we were pursuing that we got talking to the Wildlife Trust. And at that time, I personally, particularly through working with, seeing what people like Peter Cairns were doing in Scotland, had come to the conclusion that we needed to get our hands on land, because if we're going to try and change what's happening to nature, it all happens by people who own the land. And whilst we're trying to persuade people, it's extremely difficult to persuade people unless they've got some massive incentive. But if you had your own land, you could do that. So we're thinking, can we get our hands on any land? And do you know what? No, you can't. It's extraordinarily difficult. And then it's extraordinarily expensive. As everybody tells you, it's worthless. You can't make any money out of farming. You can't make any money out of grass. You can't make any money out of anything. But then you try and buy it. Crikey. Right? So I came into this world. You guys all know this. I came into this world as ingenue. I didn't know any of this 5 years ago. I knew very little. I'm learning every day, and it's a journey, I can tell you. Anyway, so we just happened to be talking to Mike about doing an education in the city about nature. And I said, wouldn't it be great if we get our hands on some land? He said, have we got any money? I said, yeah, I've got some money. So we've got this land. We've seen this land. It's for sale. And we can buy it because it's rotten land. Nobody wants it. Okay, anyway, that was that, right? ended up getting this rotten land. And it's not rotten land. When you go and look around it tomorrow, which I hope you do, it's far from rotten, actually. You know, I went out there a few months ago and I saw 2 marsh harriers. I saw a sparrowhawk, I saw a kestrel, I saw lots of little furry things. I mean, you know, if that's rotten land, we'll have it. We'll have it, right? So that was the start of looking around and seeing what we could do. What we realised is, very difficult to get hands on land. We don't really know what we're doing, we're not experts, so we need partners. So we managed to get another couple of willing partners for big projects, and you'll be hearing about those projects later from people here. National Park, National Trust. Very much pushing against an open door, the same as with the Wildlife Trust. Just the removal of certain barriers, some of which are financial, but they're not just financial, actually. Although buying land is expensive, a very small amount of money, when somebody already has the land, like the National Trust, can actually trigger quite a big change. And you'll be hearing about that. What's happening at Wallington is extremely exciting. Those partners have really helped us move things along. But it's not enough. We've started another project, which is just at the launch stage now, called the Ousbourne Vision. What that is, unusually, at the moment we're doing this alone. The Ousbourne Valley is a 6 to 8 mile valley that runs from the north of Newcastle in Northumberland, in the countryside, right down to the Tyne, through the east end of the city. It includes numerous different environments, but one of the best used and most stunning parks in the city, Jesmond Dean, is within it, as are some other parks. It's had quite a lot of attention and quite a lot of money over the years, since that part of it was given to the city by Lord Armstrong, who's up there, who was one of the presidents of the Mining Institute that used to be in this building. It all links together. And it needs revitalising. It can be a most wonderful and stunning wildlife corridor that goes from Gosford Park and further north into the hinterland of Northumberland, right down to the Tyne, and right through the urban centre. It can be a place of beautiful green, blue, health-giving space for thousands of city dwellers, as well as a place where wildlife can thrive and can join 2 environments together. We can see that, and we're not alone at seeing that. A lot of people can see that. We're about to publish a document, our vision document, which we're going to put out there, and we're going to hope partners are going to jump up and say, yes, we want to be part of this. We can do that bit, or we can do that bit. And if at the moment everyone goes, but there's no money, you know, okay, there's a bit of levelling up, can we get it? But, you know, there's not really a lot of money. It doesn't matter, because as Mike says, if we're ready and we've got schemes ready, somebody will come along with the money, and we're ready to get it. And I think that applies to a lot of things that happen here. There's a sudden whoosh of money comes through, and if you're ready for it, you know, so don't be put off from thinking about things because the money's not there, because often it will come. We're very much hoping a lot of people here in the room are going to be excited by our Ousbourne Vision, because it brings in a different element to the rewilding and the renaturing focus of what we're doing at the moment. Even all this, though, is not enough, as Mike says. It's definitely not enough. If you put a map of Northumberland up here and put down all the things, all the people here are doing, and all their sort of visions of what they're going to do in the future, it's still a very tiny part. There are lots of other things going on, of course, that people aren't here to talk about, but even so, there's an awful lot more to do. We need to harness, as Mike says, as much energy as we can get. And we must also understand that there's massive resistance to this as well. I mean, we are being championed by, let's face it, 3 institutions that aren't known for their revolutionary zeal. Right? And they're not known for putting their head above a parapet and making themselves very unpopular either. And really, should we be asking them even to do that? But there is an element of this that requires you to do that. You don't get change on the size and the urgency that we require without, you know, well, it's like breaking eggs for the omelette, without standing on somebody's toes. I think people like Walter know this. You know, he doesn't know what his peers think about him. I don't want to put words into your mouth. But, you know, there is a huge resistance. Within institutions, there's an institutional resistance, which nobody wants to be there, but is there, just to big changes. And we need big changes, and we need them fast. So how can we get rid of that resistance? We partly get rid of it with government and political help. But can anyone explain to me the amazing contradictions within government policy and funding? I mean, people, old lags that here go, yeah, it's always like that. But we come along new, and what? Right? We have to jump over hurdle after hurdle after hurdle, spend thousands of pounds to reintroduce a little furry creature into an environment where everybody wants it to come back where it used to live. And meanwhile, one of the neighbouring farms to Chevington gets public subsidy to put in some more drains to change his arable land, already incredibly low yielding, to something that last summer looked like something out of the 30s Dust Bowl. Why is that about? You know? And why do we have... We are able, apparently, to stop large forestry things because there's a few curlews, right? But at the same time, we can't stop water companies chucking raw sewage into a waterway that is poisoning our wildlife. I don't understand this, but this is all stuff that we all here can influence, I think, because together we've got a very strong voice. And that's what I'm hoping, and that's what the Rees Foundation is hoping. We're a small local charity, right? What we want to do is encourage, when we can, and if we've got some money, take away a barrier or two, advocate, maybe become unpopular, because we can do that if we need to help you guys who know how to do it, who know what is required to get to that point. And I agree with Mike. We've got the best county in the UK. There is no question. Right? It's the most beautiful. It's the most wild. You know, it is the best. And I think we can become the leader in this. We can show the rest of the country how we can work together as a local pressure group to make something really happen in Northumberland. We've got great people here. I can see them in front of me, and you're going to be hearing from them today. And together, we can really achieve a lot. And that's what I'm hoping is going to happen today. And I'm just so pleased that in this building that we helped refurbish, because it's called the Common Room. The idea behind it is that people come here to share ideas and to work out plans of action to increase the sustainable prosperity of the northeast of England. And I'm hoping that's going to come out of today. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Anne. That was a fabulous message from our sponsor, and thank you for what the foundation is doing. Right, we're going to finally start talking about Wilding West Chevington. Duncan Hutt, Director of Conservation of the Wildlife Trust. Take it away, Duncan.
Good morning. I'm actually going to step back and not say anything for a few minutes, give you a bit of quiet time. Okay, so it's against that backdrop, isn't it, that we need to do something. We've got to change. We've got to move forward and do something. We've already said, Anne's already said a lot of this, Mike's already said a lot of this. We can't just let the status quo continue because we've lost so much already. Now, I realise that sequence before wasn't very scientific. You picked many holes in it, I'm sure, but I think it gives some impression about what we've actually lost in the countryside and what we've lost across the UK over the last, since last Ice Age. And we've got to do something about that, and we've got to try and get some of those back. there's a little bit of hope, I suppose, at the end of that. That's last slide, 10 years ago, some of those things were beginning to come back again. And I remember starting in the Wildlife Trust many years ago, 26 years ago, and we'd almost lost otters from England. There was one or two in the north of Northumberland, but that was about it. And actually, otters are now pretty much throughout the whole of the UK again. So there is some positive change. There are some positive things happening. Some of those things are coming back naturally. Some of those are spreading naturally, things like ospreys as well. And some of those have been introduced or reintroduced back into the countryside and are beginning to sort of pick up again. So there is some hope there that we're actually achieving something already. But against that backdrop are some of these statistics that are still saying that we are losing nature at an alarming rate. And in order to do something about that, we have to think differently about how we tackle nature and how we integrate that into farming better. Because let's be honest, how it's been integrated to date, by and large, has kept the status quo, if that. It's still declining. Maybe it'd be worse if we hadn't done any of those things, but it's still pretty poor. So, from a Wildlife Trust perspective, we started 50 years ago or so, and we started with the idea of nature reserves. And there is nothing wrong with nature reserves. I think when we start thinking about all these sort of positive things about wilding, big areas, we forget that these nature reserves are really little oases of wildlife across the countryside. And one of the great things about the Wildlife Trust is we have little sites. We don't just have massive areas, we have little sites as well. And those scattered across Northumberland can actually produce an enormous benefit to nature. The little oases, as I say, but the places where nature can spread out if the conditions are right outside those. So there's nothing wrong with a few nature reserves, and they're excellent opportunities for people to engage with nature as well at the same time. But I think we realised 20 years ago that small nature reserves weren't going to be the answer. So our first step into the large area conservation was quite a large area. So Whiteley Moor, 1,500 hectares, 3,500 acres of upland hill farm on the Scottish border. And that is a very large site. It's still one of the very largest Wildlife Trust nature reserves across the whole of the UK. We were, as Anne's already alluded to, there are constraints, and there are many constraints, and we're actually really good in the conservation movement itself of constraining ourselves and putting barriers in the way of what we want to do and what we want to change. So there are plenty of constraints, and we didn't take the view of wilding on this site. We took the view of trying to operate a viable upland hill farm alongside nature. And I think, and within that, we planted a load of trees as well. And remember, I think it's worth remembering that the areas of woodland we planted on Whiteley are bigger than any single woodland site we own across the whole of Northumberland. So they are pretty important in themselves. But we have done quite a lot of work, and we have done quite some positive steps on site.
Whiteley Moor, a wild 1,500 hectares at the top of Northumberland. We have been gradually restoring the blanket bog, which covers over 500 hectares of the reserve. We aim to repair the severe erosion within the next 5 years. Sheep grazing has been gradually reduced and is due to cease at the end of 2024, being replaced by hardy cattle breeds. Over 50 hectares of woodland have been planted in a naturalistic pattern to complement natural regen. With stocking reduction, the aim is to let nature take the lead, with a little help from small additions of rarer species. Pop back in a few hundred years to see how she gets on.
So that's Jeff Dobbins, our estates manager. He spent an awful lot of time on site, and some of that very quickly ran through. Huge amount of peatland restoration going on the site at the moment. Lots of tree planting, as I say, over the years. So we have made real positive change on that area. But we need to make more, and as Jeff just said, over the next 18 months or so, we'll see a huge change on there. And it really will, I think, turn in from an upland hill farm into a wilding site. Have we failed? I think we have, to a point. Farming of the nature that was happening on site just hasn't succeeded in what we want to achieve up there. So 20 years later, we're making a change in what we do. So in terms of wilding itself, our next sort of dabbling into the wilding sort of concept was to look not actually on any of our land at all, but to look across the border on Kielder Head and consider the Kielder Wildwood. And this was a scheme built up by a number of partners, and then including Forestry England, whose land it is, to try and do something positive, to try and get woodland, native woodland back onto that hillside. So the Wildwoods project was born of that.
Kielder Head Wildwood is a 98-hectare site on the Scottish border at the top edge of Kielder, where a new upland pinewood is being created. Over the last 5 years, volunteers have planted nearly 30,000 broadleaf and Scots pines onto this remote and difficult site. We have not been planting a finished wood, but putting species back in and allowing nature to take over and complete the job. The site also contains potentially the only post-glacial remnants of pine woods in England, and propagating from these unique trees has been a key element. A baseline survey of the site has also been carried out, including multispectral drone imagery, soil environmental DNA, as well as bird and vegetation surveys.
So a very quick run through some of the Wildwood ideas. A lot of people, a lot of volunteers have been out there planting a lot of trees up on site. And it's been focused around that pine. I think that pine's the one that's now blown over, but blew over in Storm Arwen. But a victim part of the natural process, isn't it? I mean, that's what happens. But this is an attempt to create a sort of a wildwood, a native woodland, back onto this area of hillside in Kielder. So that was really our first sort of thing project I think we could really claim to be wilding. And then we moved on to our first acquisition for wilding itself. So wilding was the heart of the process, heart of a concept of buying Benshaw Moor. Now, Benshaw Moor is 250 hectares, 600 acres. It's quite big. Nowhere near the size of Whiteley, sixth the size of Whiteley, but it's still a nice big piece of land on the moorland edge and on the just between between Elsdon and the A696. And there's a couple of views of it. And that is not particularly wild yet. And when we look across the hillside in the autumn and see the swathes of heather, it's very easy to look at that and think, oh, that's a fantastic wild environment. But we've got to remember, heather is not a climax vegetation in itself. Heather is an understory species of woodland. And that is not a natural environment, not natural habitat. What it should have is scattered trees across that area. And so over time, we're intending not to particularly try and do an awful lot of planting on this site, but we are already beginning to see hawthorn, willows, birch and rowan starting to pop up on the reserve. When we bought it, we took the sheep off there. There was no tenancy as such, so we had the luxury of being able to remove the sheep, remove the grazing. We also had to, actually, because the fence had it. So after 2 years of work up there, we managed to fix the fence. The fence is now in place, and we can start introducing a level of planned grazing back onto the site again. But one of the things I think we need to remember about, what are we buying sites like this? What are we doing on a site like this? What's wilding about? Is it about nature? Is it about nature recovery? Of course it is. But it's actually more than that. It's about all those other things that come with that. And there's the waterfall on Benshaw Moor in two different stages. One in the height of a dry summer with virtually no water coming down there, and the other view after a heavy downpour with just gushing water down across the waterfall. Very attractive it looks, but that is not what it should be doing. We need to be stopping the water getting to that point. So one of the things we need to do is to try and get the drains blocked and the water slowed down, the vegetation longer, and keeping that water on the hill for longer. Because that will maintain the flows in summer, and it will reduce those heavy and rapid spate flows that we get after storms. Really important for a number of things, not just for nature, but that water's going down and going past people's homes in the lowlands on the lowland parts of the Tyne. When it floods people's houses, we hear about it. But we can do a lot of the alleviation for that by working properly in the uplands to sort it. So we should be doing that rather than building concrete structures to stop this happening further downstream. And actually, remembering that the water from this site will flow into the River Reed, one of the last rivers in in England, for freshwater pearl mussels. They need incredibly clean, good water. This stuff of fast flowing off the hillsides is not very good for them at all. So if we want to protect them as a species, we've got to slow the flow in the uplands. So we now have a few extra ponies on site, so the grazing has happened again, but it is going to be very limited and very controlled, and it is really about that site beginning to regenerate itself, but just with that, an attempt to recreate a natural sort of grazing pattern across the hillside. But let's all very well think about the uplands. We've also got to think further down in the lowlands, and this is a fairly typical view across a lot of Northumberland's lowlands. A few scattered trees surviving and clinging on to life across the countryside. And that is not, it's a virtual desert for wildlife. There's very little living here at all.
So the first thing with getting into rewilding is finding the perfect spot in which to do it. For us, we knew that we didn't have anything in our existing land holding that was really going to be suitable, so we had to go out and look for land to buy. It took us a little while, but eventually we stumbled across West Chevington, and we knew almost straight away on our first visit that it was perfect because there is so much potential here to deliver improvements for biodiversity.
Sorry, it was a windy day that day. It's always windy. It's never not windy there. So when the land came up for sale, it was, that was the area of land being sold. That was all those blocks on there. Well, actually, they weren't. There were a couple of them were on the list to sell, but actually weren't for sale. Don't quite understand, but anyway, they weren't. And that northern block on the map as well really had so many constraints and so many complications to it. It really wasn't an area to be buying at all. But actually, we did manage to get nearly all of it in the end, and to think about this as a nice big area of land. It was on the market in total for £3 million. But we didn't get a whole lot, so as we say, it's about 1.9 is what we paid for the section we got in the end. But it was, the initial stage in that was to go out and have a look and see what there was on site, because you do want to know what you're getting, and you do need to know that there's no nasty surprises going to come up on a site like this. So I can't say we looked at every square metre, can't even say we looked at every hectare of the site. There's quite a lot of them, but we certainly looked at every square kilometre of the site. And had a look round to see what there was. And there were some opportunities in there, there were some challenges in there. And so, looking at those views, the middle one shows the farmland, the arable land. It's been restored as arable land. It's pretty poor quality arable land, hasn't been drained. It holds water, actually great for us, but not great for growing arable crops. And then that other picture in the woodland, the ditch in the woodland, is showing really that restoration has just done the bare minimum in many ways. Those straight ditches are just taking water quickly off the land again. So we've got to try and do something. We knew we had to do something about that too. So there are problems here, but there's loads of, if you like, don't like the term very much, but a bit of a blank canvas on which to start building some positive change. And let's remember, it was mining. It was mining that created this. There's a picture of the actual hole. It was a huge hole. Nearly all the site has been mined at some point. And then there's also a picture there looking between West Chevington out to the coast to East Chevington, just to a bit of an idea about the sort of scale that the mining was happening across that whole region. And there was also deep mines under the site prior to that. So we move away from the mining and think about the future. So we've come up with a concept plan. It's going to change. You don't plan wilding particularly. You have to let wilding do it itself. That's the point. But you do need to have an idea of maybe how you're going to get there. So we sort of broke the site up into sections and thought about how we might sort of progress with the changes we wanted to make. And that involves a little bit of woodland planting, not very much on this bit, some bit on the southern section. It needs a restructuring of the woodland around the wind turbines. There's holes in it, those little holes in it are where wind turbines are. And the woodland around it, pine woodland, planted on open cast land. Storm Arwen did a huge amount of restructuring for us. Blew over hectares of trees in there, and actually probably to the benefit in the long run. Some areas we'll try actively rewilding or actively turning into natural habitat by sowing seed onto arable land. Other areas we're just going to finish the arable and walk away and see what happens, because it will do something itself over time. And then we're trying and then we're going to work quite a lot on the watercourses too, to try and we'll have to do a little bit of intervention there.
After a year of figuring out what we actually have on site, we've actually begun the first stages of the rewilding and nature recovery process. The field behind me was an arable field. Last year was its last year of production. It's now going to be taken out of production. We're also looking at slowing down the flow of water off the land, letting sort of nature take its course, re-wetting the land by building sort of dams like this, which are built out of materials that we've gathered from natural or woodland management activities on site.
So we started work, and we're thinking about where we're going as well on things like reintroductions, because one of the things we've got to remember is we've lost so many species across the countryside, they are not coming back on their own. They can't travel that far. Birds are quite good because they fly. Actually, quite a lot of insects do the same thing, but a lot of stuff is too small and too broken up in their habitats across the country to be able to get back on their own. So we're going to look, some easy wins maybe. There's harvest mice, very simple win to get some of those back on West Chevington. They may even be there, but augmentation of that population is not going to be a bad thing. Water voles is another aspiration in the short term, but let's not stop at that. Let's think bigger over time. We could go beavers, we could go bison, I suppose, but got to keep them in there somehow. But we could look bigger over time. Because we do need to get these species back in the countryside. They're not, as I say, they're not going to get there on their own without our help, because we've damaged them so far, too far already. So as Adrian's already talked a little bit about this, I suppose, how it fits in, because it fits in with a much bigger vision across Druridge Bay. And West Chevington, the area we bought at West Chevington and Stobbs was a slightly separate section there, but those bits were the latest acquisition. And on that map are all the existing sites that we had, which include Hawksley, very much your traditional nature reserve, very much your introductory site to nature, where you can go and you can have a walk round and you can see the wildlife from the bird hides and all that, and have a cup of coffee as well, I suppose. But the other sites like East Chevington, are still pretty big. They're pretty big sites in themselves. And again, we're going to change the way we look at that site and start thinking more about the wilding concepts on that reserve. There's already some great reed beds with marsh harriers over them, bearded tit, bittens over winter this winter. But it's a big site that we can do an awful lot more with. If we could just join the two together, that would be even better, wouldn't it? But we're not going to be able to do it all. So we have to think wider than what we can simply achieve on our own land. We're never going to buy it all. There's no way on earth we'd do that. So we do have to think about how we work outside our sites, and maybe think about working out into that wider countryside. So one project we've now got, funded by Networks for Nature, is to look across this zone from the Coquet down to the River Line, to think about how we might sort of influence the land outside. Change it a little bit, because actually if we change a lot of land a little bit, we can make an enormous difference. We don't have to just change small bits a lot, because that probably won't make the same impact. And so, hopefully over the next couple of years, we'll develop a project. This is development phase. We'll bring some plans together. We'll talk to a lot of the people in that area, and we'll begin to start thinking about a much more collective view about how we work across Druridge Bay and that wider area. And hopefully, the next stage of that will be a funded project to sort of actually do some more interventionist work on that area as well. And that will make a big change, I hope, across there. And we're doing that across the wider Northumberland as well. We are influencing, we are talking to people across the county in all sorts of different places. But there's an example of really that's what we don't want, isn't it? Grazed land right up to the water's edge, virtually not a bit of wildlife in it. And so that sort of thing, if we can change all of these a little bit to make them better, and maybe make them, not the same bit, obviously, but make them a little bit more, where we're creating ponds, we're creating habitat. We don't even need to take an awful lot of land out to do that, but we can make an enormous difference if we did a bit in a lot of places. And I'll just finish with a couple of views from Tuesday of West Chevington. Nice rainbow over the site. It was, hopefully it won't be like that tomorrow, but just to say for those coming out tomorrow, we'll do an awful lot more. We'll have a good look around the site in the time we've got available, talk a bit about what we're doing and where we're aiming for across that site in the next 5, 10, 20, 100, 200 years. Thank you.
Well done. Fantastic stuff. Thank you for that, Duncan. Right, this is your opportunity to start quizzing the first delegates of the day. So we've got about a 15-minute slot before you can all go and get your first or second or third cup of coffee of the day. A lot of great stuff there. A lot of quite depressing stuff there, particularly the slide of the loss of the megafauna down the years, down to the loss of microfauna more recently. Anybody have a question? Because we have roving mics, and I'm sure you're all gagging to ask questions. Heather.
Thank you. I feel like you kind of know what my question is going to be in relation to a little bit, but you talk about species reintroductions, particularly beavers, and that'll come in time. Northumberland's quite far behind, isn't it, with regards to beaver reintroductions? I've obviously worked on them in Cumbria, and we are very far behind here, so when is the right time to start talking about them? I'd expect that with West Chev, it's kind of the perfect opportunity, and if you're wanting to link up with other landowners, particularly with riparian corridors, the beavers are a pioneer to connect all of that, so I'm just wondering when you might be talking about them.
We're already talking about them, actually. We've already started some of that conversation, some of the conversation with the local parish councils and with the wind turbine company that has the wind turbines on part of the site. We've already had those initial discussions. We've already had a piece of work done on site about that as well. I think really what we're waiting for is not to have to fence them in, because that is ultimately the big problem on that site. The cost of that is prohibitive. And I think, actually unnecessary and unhelpful for a site like West Chevington. So I think, as soon as we don't have to do that, I think we'd love to try and do something. Though, of course, then we do have to bring in everyone else in the catchment, small though it is, to make sure they'll also be on side. So it may be in time, but I hope it's not that far into the future. There's certainly areas of West Chevington that you can actually look at and think beavers would be fitting in here right now and doing a great job.
Thank you.
Gentleman over there. It's like question time, isn't it? The gentleman in the blue sweater. No, not you, you!
Thanks very much. That was a really inspiring talk. I just want to ask two quick things. One, I suppose, is about conservation grazing and seasonal grazing, and the degree to which you can or cannot have animals actually living there in a sense permanently, grazers living there permanently on the various sites in a natural wild state, rather than being placed on and off as appropriate to certain outcomes. And then the other thing is about wild boar, and whether that's in any way a part of the Trust's plan and the importance of rooting animals and so on. Thanks.
Okay. In terms of timings, most of the plans we're trying to put together on grazing on sites are trying to keep animals on as all year and trying to keep them there, because you're right, taking them on and off is expensive, it's time consuming, it's complicated. So all we're trying to do is wherever possible to do that. So at Whiteley, the plan is to get some cattle on site, replace, the sheep will go and the cattle will stay, or some cattle will stay, and the idea is that they will stay potentially all year round, with the right breeds that can cope with the conditions. West Chevington, I would also see the cattle on all year, and the opportunity to get cattle grazing in the woodland areas as well, which provides that shelter that they might need in some particularly bad weather, is actually quite a positive thing in itself. So hopefully that answers the first part of it. Wild boar, yeah, you're right. It's great to have a different structure in there, doing something different. they're difficult to keep in and like a lot of things. So that might be a little practical problem, but I think we'd all love to see a few wild boar wandering around West Chevington as well, if we can.
Pigs of any sort, I think.
Well, yes, it doesn't have to be wild boar. Yes, it might be domestic. Yeah, it might be more sort of. Yes, you're right. It might be more domestic pigs than wild boar straight away.
A question from me: if and when you do introduce grazing animals, do you have a long-term plan for sort of sustainable, branded, wild West Chevington meat, for example?
It's always a possibility, though. It turns that it's been tried many a time, and it's actually quite difficult to do it and make it work. I think at the moment we're trying to look to use partner, local graziers who will work with us rather than doing it ourselves. That's the initial aim, and it's up to them then how they market and how they want to do it. If they wanted to market it through that process, great. But I think it's probably up to them at this point.
Good stuff. There's a lady over here. Just trying to keep the gender balance up. Have you noticed all the pictures around the walls? Finally, a woman headed up the Mining Institute, just before they shut it down.
Thank you. I'm allowed 2 questions as I'm a woman.
You're allowed as many questions as you like.
Okay. First one, how are you looking to make more links between Whiteley and the Wildwood site? Obviously, you've got a lot of Kielder in between, but in terms of exploring the opportunities through the forestry there, how's that going?
I think so. Probably not the right person to answer this question, to be honest. Probably Tom or Giles who answer this question better. But that is definitely happening. We've been, Forestry England have now got a project at East Kielder, and hopefully those two will complement each other really well and start linking those two areas together and linking collective management. There is already a level of collective management across Kielder Head and Whiteley, and I think that's probably going to get more so as we won't necessarily have farming tendency and we'll have a different way of managing. I think that the collective management can be much more consistent across the whole thing in future.
Great. And the second question is following on from the one about sort of marketing cattle and thinking about money. What other income streams are you looking, other than maybe membership and money from people like Anne? What about other sources of finance?
We haven't really gone into the finance on West Chevington yet, I suppose, in that respect, and whether there's opportunities for money making. We are reluctant to go through sort of stewardship type schemes because they just don't work. They don't work. They don't enable you to do wilding because they need an outcome. They need a fixed outcome at the end of it. It's also the case with biodiversity net gain. So that was another opportunity to get money in to do conservation, to do habitat creation. But it doesn't work for wilding because you don't know what you're going to aim, what eventually you're going to get in 30 years' time. So we don't want to constrain ourselves, and we're being very careful to make sure we don't constrain ourselves too tightly because we're trying to do wilding here. We're not trying to constrain. We don't want to have lots of constraints on top of us in the process. So yes, there's some discussions and some to be had and about where we might make money. I don't think that's not our primary objective, though. Our primary objective is for nature conservation, natural processes, wildlife, and that sort of things. Definitely, it's not there to make money. If we can find opportunities, great, but they've got to be secondary.
Just to add to that, there must be an opportunity down the line for sort of wildlife safaris in a sort of net tradition, but it's a long way from that. But nature tourism across the whole of Drury Bay is potential still, if not actual. And I think that's definitely in our minds. We're going to have a massive caravan site next door, so we'll have a captive audience. So we're thinking of everything. But not just this site. I think the net gain idea, the offsetting, isn't appropriate here, but it might well be another land that we acquire, even for that purpose. And we wouldn't dismiss any of the current options that are out there at the moment.
Thank you. There were a number of gentlemen, and there's one just behind you, Liz, for starters, and then we'll work our way along the row.
Thank you. I guess just some observations rather than questions, but I'd be interested to get a little bit of feedback from the panel, I guess. just very quickly in terms of West Chevington, I'm just thinking about a lot of open cast reclamation schemes which have been sort of landscape architect led, if you like. I don't know if we've got any landscape architects in the room, but an awful lot of those sort of reclamation schemes, it's very obvious that they've tried to shoehorn every different habitat type into, you know, sort of a finite area, and just looking at the sort of indicative early sort of thoughts around the, you know, the approach to West Chevington. I guess my observation would be, you know, don't try and do that. Don't try and, you know, have every habitat type represented. You know what I mean? And absolutely let the approach, you know, be driven very much by natural processes.
Well, just come back on that. Yeah, absolutely. Entirely agree with you. In fact, we've got a variation of conditions in at the moment, because there were still conditions to after post open cast mining on that site. We've got variation conditions in with the county council at the moment to take out all that stuff that was supposed to be being done. So there's under drainage of some of the fields that are supposed to be done, but there's also a huge amount of woodland, well, let's put it, tree planting across the site, and we don't want to do that, because that would create an artificial habitat across that area. Let that happen naturally. Let the grazing management allow scrub regeneration in areas and control it in other areas, and let that happen on its own time and its own way. So absolutely, we're doing a little bit of sort of wetland creation, mainly to slow that flow down and stop the erosion happening as rapid runoff through those straight line ditches. But beyond that, we're not intending to do an awful lot of interventionist management on site.
I just wanted to very quickly just acknowledge the very important reference that you made, Duncan, to existing nature reserves, you know, and the importance and value of them. I think, you know, a lot of the time, you know, people's gaze is very much away from, you know, existing nature reserves. But yeah, we mustn't, you know, forget them and the, you know, the incredible importance and value, particularly in terms of serving as, you know, reservoirs, if you like. And then just finally, just in terms of the really important point that you were making with regards to, you know, the challenges around land acquisition, land purchase, absolutely. You know, that is such a challenge for us all, and I'd just be very interested to just, you know, hear people's views in terms of, you know, do we think that that really that the government now need to be looking at maybe, you know, giving compulsory purchase powers, you know, to, you know, potentially local authorities and others. I know we've got a few statutory undertakers in the room, but if we identify areas, you know, which we consider to be, you know, so important, you know, really, really vital, which provide, you know, particularly exceptional opportunities in terms of ecological recovery, you know, and various other sort of ecosystem services, you know what I mean, reducing flood risk, carbon, whatever it might be, don't we think that actually that would be incredibly useful? So yeah, just, you know, people's thoughts in terms of compulsory purchase.
Great stuff. I think that's one for lunchtime. Gentleman in the striped shirt there, Liz. And then there's another gentleman along from him, I think.
Thank you. Hi, just say thank you to the panel. It was brilliant this morning to hear what you were saying, and I think we are all pushing in the same direction, which is great to see. But there are a lot of challenges, and I was wondering from the point of view of tying a few of the questions together, you know, the likes of the importance of nature reserves and the map that you put up there about the site with all your reserves, and the connectivity is really in my mind, and how we push for that. And there are a lot of landowners out there, or a lot of people that can help us, and there's probably some of those that aren't in the room today, and I'm thinking about the sort of the infrastructure providers, the national highways, the Network Rails, the Northern Power Grids, the Crown Estate, the church commissioners. These are all people who are under a lot of pressure now to move things in the right direction, and I think it would be really interesting to see how we can start and get those type of landowners and land managers in the room to change their management practices and help with that connectivity. And I think it's just a comment really to say I think we really need to push those type of organisations to be in the room with us, because they're not, and they are potentially people with land and also monies. Yeah.
Some of the network companies are already talking to us, particularly in relation to national highways. In fact, they're talking to us in about 3 different directions at the moment, which is very confusing. But yeah, they are engaging, and some of the big power grid through a sort of collective across the north are trying to look at that as well. So there is some work there, so some progress there. Yeah.
Anybody else? The gentleman there, and then a lady over here.
Hi. Hello. I was wondering if you could talk a bit about public access, particularly to some of the wilder sites, and particularly family day out for me as a grandfather in a wheelchair and a 3-year-old daughter. So, you know, access for people to enjoy these spaces that is not kind of rough rambling or, you know, hard navigation, that kind of thing. Thanks.
I think that's incredibly difficult in the hills. But you know, if you go to Whiteley, go to Carter Bar, there is now a path, and there's now a route along to get you out onto site, to get you into a little bit into the wilderness. Not quite, not that far, but we have improved access. Linear access routes. The whole site is open access. That's not very helpful in your case, but so all those upland sites will be open access. We do try and provide some linear routes and some ways of getting further out onto them. We haven't taken a particularly strong view, well, we haven't done very much on access at West Chevington yet because it's fairly new. We've still got to talk to the local authority about reinstatement of public rights of way, which were sort of closed during the open cast restoration, and I think that's quite an important next conversation to be had. We do want to divert some of those a little bit away from the more sensitive areas of the site. And I think what I'd also say is that, you know, all those other nature reserves and areas across Druridge Bay have access, and so you don't need to have access everywhere. Sometimes it's got to be about nature as well. So I think it's about providing access in the right places, the right level of access, where it's possible to, obviously better access. So at Hawksley, there's pretty good access around most of that site. That would probably our hub site, I suppose, in the Druridge Bay area for getting people to go and enjoy nature, because it's great. You can see lots of stuff very close at hand. West Chevington, I think, is always going to be a bit more wild than that. And while there's a road network which links all the wind turbines on site together, beyond that, I think it's going to be pretty rough. And we've got to decide a little bit about the levels of that's going to take. Because there also is the issue, of course, that as soon as you provide access for people, you also provide access for people with dogs. And that's all very well if they keep the dogs on the lead, but as soon as they don't, you start having all sorts of issues on site. So it's not probably going to be open access in that respect, but you know, it will provide linear routes across it.
Great stuff. Liz, this lady here, and then I think we'll break for coffee and we can chew over these ideas with a biscuit. The lady there behind her.
Thank you. Thank you all very much for very informative and interesting talks. Also for your candidness, really refreshing. Love that. Mike mentioned around another session around people, but also around evidence. I'm just wondering what your take on getting the community involved in that. So a lot of people call it citizen science, and then also the timescales and how we work with the decision makers to accept some of that evidence.
Yeah, absolutely.
Here goes Mike.
Yeah, I think both of those are important. I think one thing that Duncan hasn't mentioned is that the intention with West Chevington and Druridge as a whole was to set up effectively an advisory and sort of community organising group which can inform how people can get properly connected to that landscape. And it's really important from all points of view, because when you go to West Chevington, it doesn't actually feel like it's anybody's yet. It's not owned. It has no real identity as yet. It's been a despoiled land that's been completely almost turned. People have turned their back on it, and so we've got to recreate the sense of place there, and we only do that by involving local people. So that's top of our agenda, I think, to start to create that across the piece. And we are about creating new landscapes. So we want people to have a new connection with them. So that's key. the other thing, of course, and I mentioned evidence, I mentioned this idea of some form of knowledge-sharing hub, which we could perhaps create around and use as an exemplar at Druridge and Hawksley even, and West Chevington, because evidence is key, isn't it, to everything? It's king, actually. And although I'm not a data buff myself, and nothing technical about me, to be honest, but I know just how absolutely critical it is if we're going to convince people to invest in this future. The key thing that we have to do with data is prove the impact all of this investment of time and money is actually having on that horrific situation we've got to try and fix. So, yeah, that's everything from the waterways to the species to everything. We've got to really get good scientifically at building those evidence streams. And I think collectively, it's not just the wildlife. In fact, every time we talk to any of you who are doing stuff, we always end up talking about data and monitoring and surveying and how we're all doing it. And some are doing it really in an innovative way, but we're not doing it as one. In fact, we're all doing different systems. And if Rewilding Britain, I think, are partly represented here, they've come up with a great system as well. But not everybody's using their scheme. So all of that needs to be really sort of thought through as a collective if we're going to make a proper impact and convince people going forward. And when I say people, I don't actually think the person in the street is interested in data, apart from the shock of some of the stuff that's there already. We've got to show them the other side of it, of what's possible, that we are mending it. Because otherwise, people are actually getting switched off. They're actually anxious about that future. So we've got to prove that it is impossible to mend the situation. Data will help us do that. But it's not an easy job. Well, isn't it? Is it not an easy job to actually just come up with a system that everybody uses and we share all of the data in one collective? It doesn't sound like rocket science, does it? But it seems to be. And I think there are many people in this room, particularly the agencies as well that are represented, that have actually got a lot of that data. And really we need to make better use of it. So it's absolutely fundamental to me. But the people side of it, I think, goes as way back as almost creating a new, almost indigenous type relationship with new landscapes. So that people aren't looking at loss, they're looking at gain.
Thank you very much, Mike. So, first up, Stephen Lipscomb from Northumberland National Park Authority, who's going to give us an overview of the Hadrian's Wall Nature First project. Stephen.
Hello everyone. I've just been saying to a few people, this is my first chance to really talk about this in front of a large group of people, so I'm quite excited to actually talk through what we've been doing in the last couple of years at Hadrian's Wall. I have done a terrible job in terms of whittling down my slides, so I am going to rattle through at a rate of knots. But this is the only picture I currently have of me, it's the top of my head, but that's me, Stephen Lipscomb, Project Officer on the Hadrian's Wall Recovering Nature Project. In terms of where we are, the clue is in the name. It's quite handy if you pick up the Hadrian's Wall just outside us here, follow it 30 miles due west, and you'll end up at Greenlean Stonefolds. Greenlean Stonefolds, sorry, I'm doing my wandering around, not talking into the microphone. So Greenlean Stonefolds, it's roughly 200 hectares of land, 50 of which is Greenlean Lough. Greenlean Lough is in fact the largest natural water body in Northumberland. The National Park owns all that land and has done for around about 30 years. But why does the park own that land? It's not really in the park's remit to own land. And there's a big story behind it. And this map kind of tells a little bit about that story. Now this is a wonderful map done by Angus Lunn. This reproduction on this presentation doesn't do it justice, but it really is a really informative map in terms of what it's telling us around this time in terms of land use change. And as you can see, by this time already, that Humshoff and Horton area is the forest coming down, and that's a massive change in terms of land use for this area. And that was to continue down through this land as this went on. But at the same time as this changing land use, there was also a changing idea about how we should view our land in terms of its importance, and there's these designations starting to be layered across our landscape. And in our particular area there, outlined in the black, we really is a layered of designations. We have a National Nature Reserve on the Lough, we have SSSI, we have World Heritage Site, we have European designations in a special area of conservation. So a really important area. And that was recognised as this land use change was coming down, and the idea was posited that maybe this land should be bought and protected for its natural and built heritage. And that's where Northumberland National Park worked with Natural England and the Northumberland Wildlife Trust back in the 90s to work together to purchase that land. And it was purchased in iterations through a number of years until we ended up with the 200-hectare holding that we now have. So this is kind of the story since then. Once it came into the park ownership, after the iterations of purchase, it kind of deciding what to do with it. And at that time, the decision was made that now it wasn't going to be planted up with trees, we would continue to put it under a farm business tenancies. And that continued for the next 20, almost 30 years. But through this time towards the end, there was just a growing awareness around the twin crises of climate change and biodiversity loss, and just a realization that maybe this land was not doing what it could in terms of addressing those factors and mitigating for them and driving biodiversity gain. So around these time conversations about what we were going to do on that land, the Rees Foundation, we're in conversations with a number of partners in the area and talking around their ambitions for driving nature recovery across Northumberland. And the idea came as a realization that maybe this was an opportunity for us to work together with other organizations using support from the Rees Foundation to try and address that in this area. So the concept was laid in place, and then in January 2021, we actually took back management control of the land at the end of the final farm business tenancies on them. And then in April 2021, the Rees Foundation supported Hadrian's Wall Recovering Nature project commenced. So, what is the project? The project has two key aims. The first one is investigate and implement nature recovery and land management practices on green lean stonefolds. What will they look like? What can we do? And how can we improve that area? But also there's another ambition within the project, and that's to build something at a landscape scale. So how can we build a partnership of neighbouring landowners and organisations and achieve something at a truly vast scale? And this is the vision. This is where we try and encapsulate it into one sentence. And it's all around stuff that you've already heard talking of today. That idea about natural processes playing a key part in driving that basis for nature recovery. Where we are, we want to work with our neighbours, so there's a really key community and sort of local business focus on what we're going to do as well. So after 1 year of looking at it and identifying the vision, decided to how do we actually bring that into realization? What do we need to do to make that happen? And these 11 work streams were kind of focused on as a means of putting us in a position where we could do that on our land, but we could also move to a position of being able to do it and influence land use change across that entire landscape that we were working in. And I'll take you through a few of these just to tell you how they developed our ambition and how they developed our understanding of what was possible and how far we could go with this. So agri-environment schemes, they were very interested. Last working with our local farmers, we need to understand what they were. And this very quickly crystallized into environmental land management, the landscape recovery pilot. This is something that came out last year as an opportunity for projects, partnerships of land managers to look at trying to do landscape recovery within an agri-environment scheme. An opportunity for people working on the ground to actually influence and create their own agri-environment scheme that delivered nature recovery. So we worked with our neighbouring landowners. The forestry is part of our South Wark Forest is there. We've also got a large amount of National Trust estate, but there's also a real mosaic of private landowners. We managed to bring them all together, put them in a room, talk around our ambitions, and talk to them about how we could work together to try and achieve this. And we were really, really lucky and really, really enthused by the fact that we managed to get 15 signatures across that land holding, which made up about the 5,000 target, 4,500 people, 4,500 hectares was signed up to it. And there was only one outright decline to be involved, and that was a very small holding. So that was an incredibly important part of the project for us, understanding that our neighbours and our partners and our stakeholders were willing to work with us and trust us in going forward. So we put the application in, and then a few months later we were unsuccessful. Not unusual in the northeast of England. No one else was successful either. However, the second round has opened, and we have moved forward with our understanding about what we want to do, what we can do, and how we can actually utilise landscape recovery to drive what we are already planning on doing and what we are actually going to be taking forward with or without landscape recovery. But they could be a really important and powerful partner in doing that. Moving on to the second work stream I talked about there, and this is one I'm really excited about. This is about where you start understanding what you can actually do in this landscape, not about what you can do, but what you should do and the impacts of it. And this is all about what Mike has spoken about and our other speakers have already talked about. This is data-driven, this is evidence-driven, this is driving, using the data that's out there to drive good decision-making and good monitoring of understanding the impact of those decisions. So we broke it down into 5 key areas for this project. Now, this is working with a consultant. Now, step one was just that data collation, working with our partners, working with people who've worked in the landscape for years, and bringing all that data that was sitting on people's shelves, in people's minds, in people's hard drives, putting it all together and creating a map. Now, that top one there, that's the beginnings of that map. Now, on there, we've got peat depth data, but there's habitat data, there's NVC, there's ecological data that's been captured over 30, 40 years. And it's all captured now, and you can scroll through it on that map, bringing up layers and looking at what is there, what has been there historically and changes over time. The second bit was the gap analysis. So what's missing from that? Where are the gaps? Where are the holes in the knowledge? Where are the bits that we can improve upon? And that was then addressed by sending out surveyors who went out, got those peat depths, got that ecological data, and put it onto that map. Now the bit that is really exciting. This is the bit that looks at all of that data, looks at that surveys, looks at what was going on the ground, and identifies where the issues are. Now, by this time, we'd identified the fact that this project was all about hydrology. It was a mosaic of wetland habitats that become fragmented over time through different land management. And this was all about returning to some kind of joined up, functioning wetland habitat. So issues were those that were affected. It's funny, I'm feeling all right. I'm going to take this opportunity to get some water. Right, I'm going to crack on. So yeah, this bit down the bottom here. So those issues are mapped. That's first step one. What are those issues? Step two, what are the opportunities that we could use to address those issues? That's step two. That's what lets us know what we want to be doing on the ground. But step three of this process is the bit that's really important. That is, what are the impacts of addressing those issues? So how do we quantify them? What does it do? What does it make the landscape look like? What does changing what it looked like have an impact in terms of biodiversity, water quality? And that's the bit that we then use to address issues in terms of funding. That's what we use to then talk to policymakers in terms of pushing back and trying to make it change. I've got 5 minutes left, and I've got about 20 slides left, so I'm going to crack on. So, work stream 3, this is still data-driven. We had natural capital, ecosystem services, and a monitoring framework, what we've spoken about already, a harmonized, standardized monitoring framework. Really, this was all about getting capacity in to drive those things, to create those things, to work with partners, work with universities, work with our partner organizations, and create that standardized model. So we created a role, and this is our data and monitoring officer, and it's amazing to have this capacity, someone with a data-driven approach to understanding monitoring, understanding which questions you need to ask. And he's come up with some amazing ideas already about how you should start at the top, start at what policymakers are asking for in terms of data, and then you drive your framework from there. The methods come at the very end. If you need to know the question, know who you're trying to address that data to, the methods, they're easy because everyone in this room has methods. Everyone in this room has been going out doing surveys for years. Species, beaver feasibility. This is something we'd already literally talked about in the idea of doing a large-scale beaver feasibility. But really, beavers are part of the Northumberland landscape now. They're going to be an ever-growing part of the landscape. Really what we need to be doing is working with our partners and understanding how we can help and facilitate that. And actually the modelling and all the habitat data we've got. So we don't need this large-scale feasibility. What we need to do is work with our partners, and if we're appropriate, then we do a small-scale targeted feasibility that gets us over the line. But we expand that to all species and work with our partners to have a species-led approach to how that plugs into our habitat restoration. Woodland management, we have an opportunity to create extra woodland. We have an opportunity to reimagine the woodland we have on our site. We have some non-native Sitka that we'll remove and replace. Infrastructure and land management, replacing the boundaries that have been neglected for years so that we can change our management practice going forward. We can have different herbivores grazing differently across site, if so desired. And then working in awareness of our historic environment. We're in a World Heritage Site. There's an incredible amount of stuff that's happened over thousands of years. Understanding how climate change has impacted people's land management over this site for millennia will be really important in understanding and helping decision-making going forward. Communications and engagement, key. We are a national park. We have a SEAL National Landscape Centre nearby. Tying those two things together in terms of those assets to tell a story about nature recovery is going to be a massive opportunity that we have to take advantage of. And partnerships, working together. We've been really lucky from day one. We've had these people sat around the table helping us, talking to us, supporting us, coming on the journey and informing our decision-making about what it could be. Research. 2 amazing local universities really keen to come out and provide assistance and help us do that research. Some of the stuff we need to do is going to take long-term research to validate our ideas and evidence. Other things we can work with master's students to come out and do short bits of research, but building that network will be really important. So what could it look like? Number 1, hydrology. We already know now from what we've seen from the mapping what needs to be done on our site. We're going to put those things into practice immediately. As soon as we can, we'll be addressing the artificial hydrology features on site, and we'll be putting them back and restoring natural processes. Before we do that, we'll have monitoring in place to capture exactly what impact that has on that site in terms of water quality, flood mitigation. Woodland, I'll say it again, but we do have the opportunity to look at woodland, work with the forestry north of us and understand how we can work with them to influence what they're doing and how we can use their knowledge and expertise to help influence what we do. Grazing, at the moment, we continue grazing across our site. As you can see, quite a bit of it is grazed. Once we start doing hydrological restoration work, a lot of that land may no longer be suitable for extensive sheep grazing. At that point, we need to understand how we manage that land using grazing or just removal of grazing, how we can use that opportunity to gain information, do the monitoring, do the science, get the evidence. And species recovery. And this is where we really want to work with our partners to support and enhance what we've got, encourage recolonisation where appropriate, and definitely look at reintroductions if appropriate. That's it.
That was amazing, Stephen. I'm exhausted. But yeah, a fantastic overview in how a rewilding project gets underway, the amount of preparation required, particularly interested in the data monitoring, as we discussed just before the break. That really set the groundwork there. Very impressive. We can talk about that over lunch and later on as well. Elaine has already jumped up, very keen. So we've heard from the National Park. We're now going to hear from our partners at National Trust, and this is about the Wilder Wallington project. Thank you, Elaine.
Thank you. I'd just like to thank my former colleagues for giving me the slot just before lunch, which is the worst slot of the day. I don't think I can go that quick, Steve. I'll try my best. I haven't got many slides. Wilder Wallington. I'm relatively new to the National Trust. Started in July last year. It's a big organisation. It's a lot of people and a lot of systems to get your head around, but I'm slowly getting there. Just for reference, in case anyone doesn't know where I'm talking about, the bottom of the screen is where you'll find the visitor hub for Wallington, which most people know. The site extends all the way up to Harwood Forest at the top. If you were to drive about 12 miles east, you'd get to Morpeth, and then you can see the Ray Wind Farm on the horizon there, which is close to the A68. So that's roughly where we are. Wallington itself, it is the largest intact estate that the National Trust owns. There are other parts of the National Trust that are bigger, but they're piecemeal. So the Lake District is made up of a lot of places, but they don't all mesh together. So Wallington is the biggest. It's about 20 square miles. It was gifted to us by the late Sir Charles Trevelyan, who was a socialist and great guy. I think it was 1942 he donated it. It's a design landscape, which is something we've not touched on yet today, which is kind of important to us at Wallington. Sir William Blackett, in 1688, I think he took over management of that estate. And that's a conversation we have regularly internally in terms of historic landscape versus nature recovery. We roughly have about 230,000 visitors each year, and that's mainly to the visitor hub. You can see from that map, it's an interesting mix for us. Right at the top there, we've got the blue commercial area, which is our long-term lease to Forestry England colleagues and Harwood Forest. The light blue area at the bottom is essentially the visitor hub that most people go and see. And then the rest is in green. And that's our tenanted land. All of that land is tenanted. It's about 97% of the entire estate is managed by other people, if you include the commercial as well. If you just ignore that red anomaly in the middle for now, because that's a tenant farm that will go back out to tenancy imminently, so that bit will turn green as well. There's 4 of us in the project team. Myself is relatively new, getting to grips with everything. We also have the lovely Hannah, who's with me today, who does project support. I've never had a project support in a project before. I never want to do a project without one again. She's invaluable, not only in terms of finances, but her knowledge of everything that's in the trust for somebody new. We've also got Kelly, who's our volunteer and community manager, who's also come with me from the Wildlife Trust. So she's knocking down doors and opening doors to get us out into the wider community, and she's done an amazing job of that so far. I think a bit quicker than anyone was anticipating, but we love that. Speed is good. And then most of you will have met Paul Hewitt, who is one of the most passionate people I've ever come across in my life. If you need enthusiasm for wildlife conservation, have a conversation with Paul. Most of my first 6 months has been downloading what's actually in his head and trying to remember it myself. But yes, if anyone ever needs to be inspired and is having a down day, talk to Paul, because he's all about nature conservation and he wants to deliver, and he wants to deliver now. So really good person to have around. This is my worst slide. I haven't put it up because I want to read it. I've put it up to sort of make the point and sort of allayed to this earlier in the morning. This is the stuff we have to do internally for funders. We have to demonstrate why we want to do what we're doing. We have governance procedures to go through. National Trust is a large organisation. I've got various hoops to jump through, me and the project team, to get us where we need to be, and that's sort of where we are at the minute. Whilst there is delivery going on, we are still doing our governance and trying to get to that point where we can leave all that part behind and just crack on solely with delivery. But it's about working with other people, it's about more nature. You'll be pleased to know I've put it into a much simpler form. So more nature, that's essentially what we want to see. Bearing in mind 15 farm tenancies, people who are actually managing the land as farmers, and how we work together to produce the things we want to produce. Better connected with our local communities, better connected with our tenants, better connected with our residents. We have the village of Cambo within the estate, and then various Kirk Welpington and Scott's Gap on the outskirts, better connected with those around us. Kelly's already done an amazing job of having a reciprocal visit to Heppel. I can recommend the gin, it's great. We're not going to deliver all the things we want to deliver without people as well. Volunteer offer at Wallington is quite limited at the minute, and again, that's something Kelly's working hard on to increase that, make that better. Lots of opportunities coming up, if anyone's interested. She told me to say that. And remembering that we are a visitor experience, we are a visitor organisation. And one of the key things to say about Wallington, during COVID and the restructure, the way that the money was divided up amongst the National Trust, Wallington never really had any money before, and they've changed. That's changed because that system has changed. And now suddenly the staff at Wallington have money, and they have money to be able to do the things that they've always wanted to do, but no one's ever listened to them. And that's why this project is so exciting, and it's really great to be on board. And it's also one of those projects that people want to give me money now, which is great, but until I've got through that final governance bit, you know, I can't quite say yes to absolutely everyone. There are some constraints to that though, and I've obviously touched on the historic landscape, and there is an internal meeting in a couple of weeks where the nature recovery staff and the archaeological and historic curatorial staff are going to come together in a room and talk about how we deliver nature conservation, but look after our historic landscape as well, the things that are important as part of that. So that'll be an interesting discussion. I'll get back to you on how that goes. That's just internal. We've got the issue of carbon as well. We've set ourselves a target of becoming net zero as an organisation by 2030. So a lot of the stuff that we hope to be able to do at Wallington, the centre will be looking at us to try and deliver as much of that as we can. We talked about being a visitor experience. We want to increase that. We want to have more people being able to see more nature. But with that comes the added pressure of more facilities, possibly more toilets, more cafes. How does that sit? Does that go against everything we want it to do? How do people get to Wallington? They've got to drive. There's no public transport. We're not on a national cycle network. Issues to overcome. And obviously there was a question about access earlier, and one of the key strategic aims of the National Trust is to make everyone welcome. And there's going to have to be many different ways that we achieve that, whether that's digitally, whether that's through multi-purpose access, whether that's volunteering opportunities, whether that's education, who knows? World is our oyster. And also financial sustainability. If tomorrow we turned all of that green map into red and it was all in hand, that would cost us an awful lot of money to maintain. And it's about finding ways that we can maintain that in partnership with other people to make sure we continue to have more habitats and species. So as always, this is Paul's work. this is what I arrived to. Got to set some nice big targets. What's the aspirations? What do you think you can achieve? And these are all the things we think we can achieve if we deliver Wilder Wallington over the next 7 to 10 years. Lots of habitat restoration, lots of species, introductions maybe, if relevant, lots of tree planting, which I know is another question in itself. But it's not just about nature, it's about people as well. And there are loads and loads of opportunities to work with people as part of this project too. And again, you know, I made reference there to supporting our farmers. You know, basic payment scheme is disappearing as we speak. How do we support them going forward? How do we still have farmers managing the land for us with more nature involved? I wanted to put this one up because this sort of shows the extent of Wallington, but also what's around us. And obviously people have talked already this morning about working together, which we're very keen to do, and opening our doors. There are hardly any designations on Wallington. There are 2 tiny SSSIs, Fallalees flush at the top, and then there's Greenlight and Quarry also at the top as well. So we're not restricted by any designations, which is kind of helpful. But look around us at what there is and how we fit into that jigsaw, and we just think there's really loads of really good opportunities in terms of linking up with other sites, corridors, etc. So I'm going to quickly talk to you about 3 things that are happening. So I said about going through governance, but sometimes we're ignoring that, we're just cracking on anyway. The red farm in the middle is Gallows Hill Farm, and that was an opportunity because it came up because the tenancy finished. It was an agricultural holding out tenancy. It's worth saying we've got about 50% farm business tenancy, 50% agricultural holding out. There was no succession. What are we going to do with it? So we sort of just rested it for about 18 months. And the idea was to have sort of a higher nature value farm when it went back, which is all very well. We were planning, it was all good. And then our general manager, Sally, one day got a phone call from some very high people in the National Trust. And she thought, oh my goodness, what have I done? What's happening? And they brought this to the table. Matt Baker's Farm of a Lifetime. I've learned about this in my first week. We're doing what? This programme is going to focus on what it's like to, the process for being a tenant for the National Trust, what it's like being a farmer, but what it's like actually having to meet the challenges that we all face in terms of changes in government policy for nature conservation as well. Coming to a TV screen near you, Channel 4, autumn-ish, as far as I know. I know no other information. It's a need-to-know basis. Then I can't say anything I shouldn't. But the particulars for that farm, it's all about wetland restoration. It's all about grassland restoration. And then one of the other big ones as well, again, it's come about by an opportunity. Another tenant who, coming to the end of their farming life, wanted to sort of think about what they should do next, where we could go. And after much negotiation, there's going to be a new community woodland, New Biggin. And that's basically between the villages of Cambo in the middle. You can just see the writing for it at the bottom, and Scott's Gap to the west. That's come back from its environmental impact assessment application, and that's been approved. We don't need EIA consent. So that hopefully will be being planted this year. The only small hurdle still to go through is access, and we want to try and make that as accessible as possible. So there's a bit of planning to get through first, but fingers crossed that one will be happening soon. And I can't not talk about it, because I know everyone's going to ask questions about it. Beavers. We do have a licence for beavers in an enclosure at Wallington. It is imminent. I cannot give you a date. I know everyone's going to ask. They are coming. The official National Trust line is spring. Hopefully, by the end of April, within a month and a half, they will be in. We're just going through the final, ticking all the boxes for the licence agreement in terms of the enclosure itself. Obviously, everyone's really excited about this. The first one's back in Northumberland. I've blatantly stolen the picture from last year in the drought conditions. Hang on, I did write down where it was because I knew I'd forget. Clinton Devon Estates, there you go. To show the difference that the beaver habitat made in that extreme drought condition. And obviously, I've got a big also there says, in capitals, mention funders. So I need to say thank you to Anne Rees and the Rees Foundation, who are making the beaver reintroduction possible. Watch this space, we'll let you know when they're in. And I know everyone's going to ask questions, but luckily Sandra King is here, and she knows more detail than I do in terms of technicalities. So I was tempted to put any questions that are not about beavers, but...
Do you want to stay there? Because of the phenomenal work by Stephen and Elaine in rattling through their presentations, we have actually got 5 minutes for questions. Elaine is here now. Has anybody got a question for Elaine or questions for Stephen, who's perched at the front? We have the roving mic again. Angus at the back.
A question for Steve. The National Park has always had a policy of keeping forestry back from Hadrian's Wall. I take it that doesn't apply for semi-natural woodland.
No. Well, I hope not, because I think there's definitely opportunities there where we're looking, and we'd certainly like to understand them and maximise them as a means of connecting habitats and forming sort of a mosaic of connected habitats there. So the National Park may have in the past had a blunt approach to it, but not going forward. We can't afford to be so black and white.
Probably got time for another couple of questions.
Hello. Again, a question for Stephen. I don't think you mentioned carbon in the presentation. I wondered if you'd done any carbon balance and if you found it helpful.
We haven't as yet. So what we've got with our data and monitor officer coming in, they'll be establishing the means of baselining those different metrics that we need to measure to understand the impact of what we do, understand where we are now and understand where we are going forward. I can't share any information on that because luckily with having someone with a data background and a monitoring expertise, I haven't had to get into the nitty-gritty of it, but we will definitely be making a point of understanding carbon in all its forms, both PE, non-PE, and flux, and all of those things to help us inform decision-making.
Gentleman over here, please.
Yeah, maybe that's the sort of thing that the Knowledge Hub could help to answer, like the carbon effect of these interventions, because, yeah, we have no idea. My question, and I make no apologies for the pun, with the beavers, did anyone lodge a complaint?
No, not vociferously. There are a couple of people locally who we've had the pleasure of meeting who are very anti the whole wilding. They believe that we're going to be kicking tenants off the land, which is obviously not our intention at all. We want to work with them. I had a very interesting public engagement session where this person actually came out from behind the woodwork and spoke to us, but just was very open and honest and said, yes. He said, so you want them to be roaming? Yes, absolutely. We would really love the fences to be down eventually. We'd rather not have the fences, obviously, but we have to have them as part of the licence at the minute. No, so other than the odd one or two people, not a lot. Our tenants are okay. I think the language that Paul used with recommendations from Rasheen and Derek was, can you tolerate beavers, not will you have beavers? And that word tolerate seems to be the right approach.
Gentleman over here.
Yeah, I was just wondering if you could comment either, actually, on, because it's fantastic what's going on. Great to see National Trust, managing land for public benefit. A lot of that farmland probably hasn't been managed in that way before, so it's great to see the National Trust move in that direction. Great to see the National Park Authority providing that exemplar. But the vast majority of land is owned by private farmers who have to make a living off their land. They're about to not make a living off their land because of the changes to subsidy systems and trading arrangements changing and so on. And I'm wondering about, how do we use this as a just transition for the farming communities to move them maybe away from sheep farming, possibly, into a more diverse farming economy, which is probably going to include voluntary carbon markets, biodiversity net gain, niche meat, whatever it is. How do we help those farming communities make that transition in a way that's good for climate and good for nature, and good for them as well?
It's worth mentioning that there's 15 tenancies. Some of them are already on board. Some of them are already doing this, and I think Hannah said from her discussion with our biggest non-supporter, We're getting rid of proper farming. What's a proper farmer? There are tenants on Wallington who are doing nature conservation and farming and making a profit already. So obviously I've got to give a shout out to them first because there's people already doing it. And there are others that are not so happy about it, are struggling, wondering what they're going to do once their BPS payment completely disappears. One of the key things that I can tell you is our general manager at Wallington insisted that beaver enclosure is part of the tenancy. So we're going to be working with them, but that beaver enclosure is for the tenant when they're in place to hopefully use as a diversification for more sustainable funding. So it's big decisions like that with people like the general manager at Wallington are willing to make that will help us. And obviously we want to do everything we can to support our tenants in that transition. There's a brand new land use and farming advisor been appointed who I'm working really closely with, who's going out and trying to get them, who's a farmer himself, which is even better because the conversations then are not starting from a beginning point. He understands their language better than I can, so it's really useful to have that. So yeah, it's going to be, sometimes it's going to be slowly, depending on the tenant, but I will say there are tenants out there who are already doing it and doing a good job. And it's trying to get all of them to move in that direction, and we're doing our best. Conversations about this didn't just start last year when the project team started. The staff at the National Trust started these conversations in about 2018 when the National Trust decided nationally to change their policy and change their approach. So it's not like we're just knocking on doors going, hey, wildlife, you know. They knew it was coming, they've known it's coming for a while. And whenever we do anything funding-wise, we'll be looking at ways to make sure that those businesses can be sustainable. Because as I put up at the beginning, if that all turned to red tomorrow, how on earth would the National Trust afford to manage it and pay for it?
Very good, thank you.